Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru. And welcome to our next episode of the Autobiography of a Yogi, line by line. We're right now in chapter 6, the Tiger Swami, and we're finishing it today. Today is episode 4 of chapter 6, or part 4 of chapter 6. I think that's a better way of saying it. I'm with the usual crowd. Not Lauren, she can't make it today, but Chris and Priyank, how are you guys doing?
Fantastic.
Good, thank you.
Enjoying the Porto weather.
Yes.
Shout out to the Portuguese.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it must be really beautiful up there right now, the summer in Portugal. Do you have those? I keep reading about it being really, really hot in the south of Europe. Is that the same over there where you got the scorching heat?
Well, Porto's right on the edge of Portugal, and it, I think, has this nice cooling effect from the Atlantic. So, you know, it's quite mild, actually, quite temperate. 25 degrees, perfect weather for me, the Irishman. Anything above that, I think I would start to struggle.
Amazing. Yeah, it's probably a bit like it is in LA. Like, it's pretty hot, but you got the wind from the ocean that cools it down a bit, depending on where you are. Yeah.
Guruji, I'm following Guruji's advice with getting a bit of sun every day. Some sunbathing, 10, 15, 20 minutes a day.
Sun bath, he's called them,
yeah.
Yeah. Did he say somewhere that like sun, regular exposure to sun is conducive to spiritual progress? Did he say that?
Yeah, I think it's in the lessons, right? And I think in there they kind of put an asterisk, like back when Guruji was saying get half an hour. Now we have to calculate in the ozone layer depletion, and it's maybe now down to 10 or 15 minutes a day.
Is that right?
It's in there.
With sun power factor 50.
Yeah, just be outside in the shade.
Yeah. That's what I do. Sunblock factor 50 and shade. That's how I like my sun.
What a sissy.
Yeah. Anyways, let's jump right into the chapter, to the last part. So we basically we had this prince of this city called, or is it a region, Kuch Bihar, right? And he kind of talked the Tiger Swami into this big fight, and he basically left him no choice but to fight. And then we also remember the prophecy that his dad was given, that he shouldn't fight because bad things will happen. But of course, the Tiger Swami did not care about that. He is fearless, and he went straight to the cage to go see the tiger. And the last thing that happened in the last episode was he was outside the cage and he went right in without any hesitation, like not kind of what I would have done. But yeah, he did it. He starts fighting that tiger. Yes, Chris?
Yeah, I'm just thinking it's a pretty good lesson. If you're going to take lessons from, you know, pretty much everything that we're doing, you know, analyzing line by line. Yeah. It's a pretty good lesson in that if you do something silly, like fall for a challenge by a prince, you know, that kind of, the hook was his pride. If you do something silly and kind of take the bait, at least face the challenge head on with full faith, as he's done. So, you know, no matter what, you know, do it with full faith and confidence. But yeah, making the best of a bad situation, really, isn't he?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, but you're also right that you shouldn't have taken the bait in the first place, but it is true, like it was based on his pride, right? Otherwise he said he was going to tarnish his reputation, and he didn't want to have any of that. Chris?
Yeah, Yogananda often said that it was very painful for him to be under the apprenticeship, let's say, of his guru, of Sri Yukteswarji, because it was very hard on his ego. It was like pulling teeth sort of thing. And not many people would be willing to do that, quite simply. So in this sense, he's almost, you know, the premonition, or his guru that came in to warn his father about the upcoming incident that he was going to have would have been maybe less painful for him to take if he had have accepted that and listened properly and accepted that, than what's to come. But maybe it's like the whole Neo thing in Matrix where the Oracle says, hey, you're going to, or don't worry about the vase. And then he turns around and knocks the vase over. And it's like, well, would he have actually knocked the vase over if, he wasn't warned about it or something to that effect? Maybe it was destined, he had to do this. So when we say like, oh, he didn't do the right thing or he did the right thing, it's an interesting concept because we battle with this right and wrong, black and white, but no judgment on the poor fella. He maybe had to do this to get to where he is.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on that in the sense that he had some karma to burn in this cage.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So it seems kind of like this had to happen. There was no other way. There was this karma that needed to be burned. And so and then I guess that's also what you said earlier, Chris. If you have those kind of situations, let's just face them head on and go for it. And that's what he does. And then as he slams the cage door behind him, the tiger's already on him. And the tiger already injures his right arm, which has never happened to him. He has never had, from what it seems like, he hasn't really had many injuries fighting tigers. He was always way superior to them. But this time, this is like, it starts badly, to put it mildly. And he basically injures his arm to the effect that he can barely use his right arm anymore. Now he's one-armed in this fight. And if that would have happened to me, I mean, at least now I would have, some doubt might have creeped into my mind, right? It would have been like, oh my God, maybe what they all said is true. Maybe this guy was actually a saint. Priya?
Yeah, doubt. Also, he subconsciously could have let it happen on purpose, in the sense that you have the feeling that he kind of came into it very tentatively. And I sense that the feeling of like the words of his guru, essentially, he didn't know it was his guru at the time, but this prophecy was probably in the back of his mind, and the ferocity of this tiger is all like coming into fore at the same, all the rumors, it's all coming into the fore. And it's maybe he had it in the back of his mind, and rather than just starting off in a good foot, like beating the tiger, he kind of wanted to play the role that his guru had kind of foreseen.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting concept, because in a lot of films you see a lot of the heroes in these big in the scenes where everything's coming to a crescendo, they tend to be injured and then they still overcome. You could probably list a ton of films, but one that comes to mind is Gladiator or Batman, like these things where the enemy really strikes first and kind of in an underhand way catches them off guard in some way, but yet they still overcome. So yeah, it's following a tried and tested Hollywood sort of script.
Yeah, so like Hollywood following Yogananda's tried and tested superb narrative. Let's say that.
Yeah.
But going back to what his guru was saying, like if he was reeling for the words subconsciously, he was actually wanting it to come true. So in that sense that he knew that if it did come true, then his ultimate salvation was also going to come true. So he kind of therefore invited the first bite, and that's kind of confirmed in the next section, which says the prophecy of the saint seemed about to be fulfilled. There's no reason for you at that time, if you thought he was just some random saint, for you to come to realize that as the tiger's got his fangs into your flesh.
Yeah. No, and you're right. I wonder if he actually thought that far already at this point. If he was like, I'm gonna be and also I'm not sure if that sounded so enticing to him, right? I'm not sure what his goals were in life up until this point. He was like this fame-seeking tiger tamer, right? He wasn't really the monk kind of person at this point, right?
Yeah, the premonition that we read out in a couple episodes ago, it said not too much detail really. It simply said that the next tiger encounter shall result in severe wounds. So he pretty much already had a severe wound, like you said, Mike. You know, he seemed to not have had this before, so it may have been his first time really getting struck by a tiger, certainly early on as what he had done here. So although I agree with you, Brank, it's a lovely, like, deep sort of take on the subconscious acts of you know, people in general, but certainly of Tiger Swami. He still didn't know what was really going to happen. And was he actually going to win, or was he going to sort of retreat and say, okay, well, this one's too much. It was, I get defeated. So he really showed a lot of vigor to keep going, really, after taking on such a injury.
Yeah, and he was really, like we said in the beginning, doubt might have creeped in, and there's a sentence that he feels like the prophecy of the saints seemed about to be fulfilled. So at least this thought came into him, and I wonder if the other thoughts also crept up on him, the ones where the tiger is a demon sent from the jungle and all those rumors that came out, right?
Yeah, and also his kshatriya, he's like harnessing his kshatriya energy, i.e. the battle. Guruji says the real kshatriya, or the warrior caste, is one that fights the senses, but is also the ultimate fighter as well. So here he's like really harnessing, using that pride perhaps, and using it for a higher cause in this specific moment.
And then let's carry on, because he then fights back really strongly, and he says he can't use his right arm much anymore, but he still uses his left arm to punch the tiger, swing after swing, and he turns the thing into a real match. So now it's basically both sides are landing hits. Yeah.
And he said he like hid his injured arm in his waistcloth, which kind of there's that old adage, like, don't show your opponent any weakness, and he's really like, and that apparently also applies for a tiger, feline beast, as well as human fights and some gladiator and things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I couldn't find a tiger with both arms, but he just has one arm, and somehow this is like a real fight. Yes.
No, he said you can. Soham Swami said average just takes a reasonable amount of strength. You've got that strength, Mike. You just don't have the willpower.
Is it like one of those fighter movies from the 80s, early 90s, where you first see them training, you see them go to the gym and stuff and fight with their sensei, and then you're ready for the fight?
Yeah, it's something like between that and Rocky, where you have to drink raw eggs, like.
Yes, beat the meat. Yes,
Adrian. I love the line here that my famous fistic punishment rained on his head, because me and my cousin, when we used to fight as children, we all had special moves. My special my special move was, I was ridiculously skinny as a child, and my pointy bones were very good weapons. So I had this move called the knee force, and what I'd do is I'd pin my cousin down, who's considerably heavier than me, and I'd use my knee to force it against his temple.
Jesus.
And the force of that sharp knee would cause him to surrender. And incidentally, my cousin's special move was, because he was much bigger than me, he'd call it the flop, and he'd just basically flop on top, and then I'd suffocate, so I'd have to surrender. I don't think either of these would have worked on the tiger, though.
I think Elon Musk calls that the walrus.
The walrus, yeah.
Something similar.
Okay, So yeah, he didn't call his moves anything, but he did have his famous fistic punishment. And he said that usually, I think his expectation was once he starts beating the tiger would back off. But because he was bleeding, that blood kind of worked as an extra motivation for the tiger. They kind of, he calls it a maddening first sip of wine, right? So the tiger is like in a trance now, and he just probably is in complete attack mode, and he's really not going to back down like he would have expected. I guess his other fights with tigers were that he beat the tigers a few times, and then the tigers would have a lot more respect. But this is not the case here at all. So what happens is there's this real back and forth, and there's a real fight where both sides land punches, and the people that watched that, they must have gotten the fight of their lifetime. I mean, I wish I would have been there. This must have been some spectacle.
You sound like a dipsomaniac, which is what the word used. According to my long dictionary, it means the compulsive desire to drink alcoholic beverages. So the tiger was considering the blood of this Soham Swami as alcoholic elixir.
Can we say sangomaniac or something, like for blood? Bloodomaniac? Yeah. So they keep going, and it's really well written. So I think the way it's written, it's like a script of an action movie or something. So I was really entertained. And then comes the finale. The finale is dramatic. So at first people seem to be scared for the tiger Swami, because somebody is saying shoot the tiger, and then apparently there is even a guard trying to shoot the tiger, and they miss. So that would have been an unsatisfying ending, right? If they would have shot the tiger and then they would have said, yeah, we had to save you. So probably for the best. And then he lands as more blows than the tiger, I guess, because he then finally defeats the tiger. The tiger collapses and lays quietly. Yes, Priyank?
Yeah, it's going back to shoot the tiger and kill the tiger.
Oh yeah.
You may feel bad for the tiger in this moment, but if you have to choose between a tiger's life and a human's life, then Guruji tells us through the autobiography you should choose the human life. And in this case here, it kind of backs that up, because the natural instinct of the audience is to shoot the tiger, even though they come to see a really good fight. They don't want to see the end of a human life. And if you look at chapter 12 of the autobiography of a yogi, life with Sri Yukteswara's in Sri Yukteswara's ashram, this kind of thing happens where, like, Mukunda was about to slap a mosquito, and then he thought of ahimsa, and he resisted the urge to do it. And then Yukteswara was like, well, why didn't you just do it? You've already done, in your mind, you've already killed the mosquito, so half the sin has already been committed. And then they have a philosophical discussion, and then Mukunda asks, what if, should one offer himself a sacrifice rather than to kill a wild beast? And this is the exact circumstance that we're talking about. And then Sri Yukteswara essentially says, no, man's body is precious. It is the highest, has the highest evolutionary value because of the unique brain and spinal structure. And so no lower life form is so equipped. It is true that man incurs a minor sin if he is forced to kill an animal or any other living thing. But the Holy Shastras teach that the wanton loss of a human body is a serious transgression against the karmic law. So we'll get to that later, but this kind of further reinforced, obviously, this that we should save the human, even though in this case, the tiger didn't really do anything wrong. He's acting on his instincts.
Yeah. And I guess if you're the soul and somebody kills you in your tiger body, you will probably go on and incarnate as the next evolutionary step, right? But if you lose precious time on Earth as a human, you lose the chance for evolution towards self-realization, right? So I can see, but without spiritual context, this doesn't make any sense. But like the way Sri Yukteswar just explained it makes a lot of sense, right? So yeah, it doesn't mean we should kill any animals, I guess, because he still said it's a minor sin to kill an animal. So I guess animals are great. We don't want to kill them. Don't want to harm tigers or fight them. But he eventually beats the tiger, and the tiger finally collapses. And then Mukunda says that funny sentence like a pussycat, and that makes the tiger Swami smile. And that's the thing. He must have been really happy, right? Because this was like a really much more ferociously fought battle than he expected, right? He probably fought many tigers before, and he thought it would be like that, but this was very different. This was very much to the death for him, and so he was very happy. And yet he kind of he tied up the tiger, and then he put his head into the tiger's mouth. I mean, I don't know what to say, Priyank.
Why are you laughing, first of all? Explain to the audience why is this funny?
That's insanity. Like, why would you do that? Why would you do that? I mean, I like, you can read on Wikipedia the strength of a tiger's mouth. How like it's probably not possible for his arms to really keep it open if the tiger just wants to bite him, but he just goes for that.
They didn't have he didn't have Wikipedia, Mike. What can the poor guy do?
Okay.
He had those physical, back then they probably had those physical encyclopedias, you know, the 5,000 series
in the library somewhere.
Yeah, in the prince's library. He could have just wandered across. But in this case, he's obviously doing it as a show, isn't it? A show, and it's for the spectacle, and it's a very pridelistic spectacle that he's trying to create. And the old adage, pride comes before the fall, certainly rings true in this case, as we know what happens after he does this silliness.
Yeah, so I imagine him parading around the tiger, and everyone is like cheering for him. And then while he's not looking, the tiger snaps the chain and suddenly sits on his shoulder and bites his shoulder. And that must have been another big injury that incurred from that. So he had already his red arm that he couldn't use anymore, and now the tiger bites his shoulder. So maybe that was necessary, because after the arm wasn't enough, maybe he needed that lesson as well. Yeah, Priyank.
Oh yeah, true. And also he essentially must have been careless, I think, in how he tied up the tiger, because if it's you imagine it was a good chain, so if he did it properly, the tiger would not have escaped. So he had pride, because he did this whole, head and mouse thing, and secondary, just like did it kind of, willy-nilly and a bit carelessly, the tying up process, one which you and I would probably do very, very carefully.
Yes. Well, people first I do the hat, and then I look, where's the exit? I was like, that's where I'm going.
Run. No, but you can't run, because then you look like a sissy, right? So you got to just like play it cool. You got a reputation to uphold.
That's right. Still, no parading. I would not have put my head in his mouth. I would have been like, there's the chain, I'm out of here.
Would you have allowed me to conduct the knee force on you? Because you had that much belief in your strength that you can withstand.
No, I think the temples are very sensitive. I think Need Force is a deadly weapon. I don't think that's a good idea. So then I think he's already, like, the way I imagine it, he's done parading, and he gives some people like the finger guns maybe or something like that, and he walks towards the exit, and then suddenly he has the tiger on his back biting him, and this could have been a complete game changer, right? This could have been the moment where he loses the battle. But he has, even though all this happened, he's very, very convinced that he's beating the tiger. So the tiger chews up his I mean, I imagine it's not easy to have a tiger who has your shoulder in his mouth, right? Get the tiger off you, right? But he did. He pinned him down, and then chained him more carefully. Priyank.
Maybe the tiger wasn't as strong as we thought, because surely it had the upper hand in 2 or 3 instances in this battle. So either like the guru intervened here, or this tiger wasn't. Maybe that's a better version of events, actually. The guru intervened to put some doubt in the tiger's mind or release its death grip, because you can imagine that a tiger that's got the upper hand, no person is surviving, especially, like they say, like, leopards, they've got the strongest bite. You can literally, it can crack a skull, obviously, and the tiger may not be as strong as that, but it's obviously not going to let go if it's got the upper hand, is it?
They're notoriously lethal, and usually they go for the neck. Like the big cats are really notorious for clean kills, which is probably the only blessing if you were to encounter one in the wild. Is they put you to sleep pretty quickly. But I think in this case he was so enraged. The tiger was, starved a little bit, and he's probably never fought a human being before that's actually fighting back. So, you probably imagine that the tiger's a little bit stunned and probably not as efficient self as they otherwise might have been if they could just stalk and prey, stalk their prey first or something.
So you're saying, Chris, if you're in a position where it's got your arm, then you can also do your famous fistic punishment as well. Unless it's got your neck. You only finish if it's got your neck.
It's the headbutt right between the eyes.
I can give it a knee force, I reckon. It might work.
All right. I think this is all pretty like, I didn't think of what Chris just said, but that's what they usually do in the wild, right? They go up to a big animal, to a big bovine, and bite them in the neck once, and that's it, right? So maybe the tiger was going for the jugular and then just missed it, and just had like I said, this was a really good chance for the tiger. But also, back to my point that I made in the last episode, why starve the tiger? Is he really gonna fight better if you starve the tiger? I don't think the tiger was at his best in this fight. But be it as it is, he eventually pins the tiger down, ties him up more carefully, now with 2 big injuries, but leaving the cage. And he has now fulfilled all of the conditions, right? So he left the cage alive, fought the tiger, left the cage alive, he tied the tiger up. And what happens now is, I don't know what the picture was like. I mean, honestly, if there was ever this device where I could go see the past or go to the past, I would go to that fight and watch it, because that sounds amazing. Like, what do you think this guy looked like after the fight? Did people look at him?
You wouldn't go to like Babaji, the palace that materialized?
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure I'm sure if Babaji would let me. He would probably put like some kind of force field around it. But yeah, I would like to see that. Chris?
I think if I heard you correctly there, Mike, I would disagree. I would never vote with my. I would vote with my feet and never attend such an event. It's like kind of like in Spain, like they have, they fight the bulls still, don't they? And then they sort of kill them. If they would kill them if they go out of hand. which I just think is not the way we should be approaching life these days. So yeah, this is sort of what Frank was saying there, that Swami, the Tiger Swami, had his pride, and he was putting his head in between the tiger's mouth just for show, and that was ultimately his downfall, right? So, you know, all of that activity is probably quite negative, right? And that's, you know, something that, yeah, maybe it would be wise to avoid fueling.
Yeah, and you can say downfall, but he actually won the fight. So he paid a price for it. But he comes out of this cage and people are cheering. It must have been a weird sight, because you probably saw his injuries and blood everywhere. Yeah, probably had some ancient Rome vibes there. And so he comes out of this cage, and the whole city enters a holiday period because of that. So it's a really big deal. And I'm guessing the prince was very happy as well. And he probably congratulated him and gave him all the money. And he also offered him the tiger. I don't know. I said that last time already. What do I do with that tiger? Like, is he going to be my house cat now? Or I don't know. Like, doesn't seem they got along very well. So I would probably not accept either. Chris?
There's some kind of alternative, like, happy ever after storyline there, isn't there? Where they become best friends.
Raja Begum and Soham Swami. Yeah, I can see that. Maybe, do you think those two souls, they kind of entered a kind of process where they will see each other more often, and maybe as humans, and maybe eventually the tiger will become his disciple?
Maybe that's the story behind all these. You know, you got loads of swamis in India that have got like tigers as their pets. This could be maybe this is the kind of thing that they did to warrant such a pet.
Yeah, and one thing that the saint earlier predicted was that he will become a monk, and in fact, something happened. Calls it a spiritual change came over him, and suddenly he wasn't so interested anymore about fighting tigers and all the fame it brought, but suddenly he was looking at his life in a spiritual context and not in the material one, which is really interesting how that happened. And there's one story about a spiritual change, or talking about spiritual change in the Bhagavad Gita that Priyank brought up.
Yeah, so in this case, so he's obviously having, in this moment of his life, he's suffering heavily, and you know, his worldly ambitions, he's said, are pretty much, he's closed the door on them. And we said that he had to undergo this moment specifically, perhaps to burn some karma, so he would be ready for the initiation. And he must, and certainly when you have illnesses and, you know, at death illnesses, then it's like the heaviest, it's like a lot of karma that you would burn, I'd imagine, in that scenario. And so he, whether knowingly, willingly, or unknowingly, his guru, I think, probably brought about his this turn of events. But in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a section about us not needing to go through this pain, essentially, not needing to go through these, you know, ebbs and flows of our life, and ups and downs. And it's very well described in the Gita and in God Talks with Arjuna, and the commentary in chapter 8 verse 25, which says, some men, ignorant of the three main roads, listen to the instructions of the Guru, following the path of worship, regarding the ancient teachings as the highest refuge. Such men also attain immortality. It's Chris, do you want to just read what Guruji describes that verse to mean?
Listening to the Guru is an art that will take the disciple to the supreme goal. If the devotee knows nothing of scientific yoga and Sankhya reasoning and is unable to disassociate himself sufficiently from his activities to qualify as a karma yogi, still, by following with full faith his Guru's teachings, he will achieve emancipation. Sometimes students say to me, such and such a person is making better spiritual progress than I am. Why?
I reply, he knows how to listen. All men would be able to transform their lives by hearing with deep attention the simple counsel given to the ethical codes of all religions. It is the stony core of egotism in the hearts of most men that prevents their listening carefully to the wisdom of the ages.
And isn't that so true? That last line, the stony core of egotism. And Soham Swami, his guru came to him, and he could have prevented this 6 months worth of pain and suffering, but he chose not to listen, right? And Guruji says that the disciples that are good disciples, they know how to listen, and this is the example of what happens when you don't listen.
That's very interesting. What listening means in this context, right? It means that you don't follow your ego, but you kind of give in to the surrender to the guru. That's also what surrender means, right? So surrendering the ego to the guru, surrendering yourself to the guru, and that's not an easy thing to do. And oftentimes, suffering is what kind of resolves the situation in the end.
Yeah, and suffering, and also surrendering the fruits of your endeavors to the guru, both successes and failures. So in this case, he obviously failed, but he could have, I'm sure he did, because he's in such a moment of profound reflection about his life. He's surrendered his pain and suffering essentially to this guru, because what happens as soon as he recovers, he knows that his guru has played a part in all of this, probably preventing the tiger from killing him there and there in that ring, and now he's got that feeling or that impulse to go to him.
That's a really good segue to another story that I want to bring up. It's basically part of an interpretation in the Second Coming, and the angle is slightly different. The angle is, you have the Tibetan holy man who sees the Tiger Swami, and he feels he's ready to be or maybe he says he's almost ready to be my disciple, and I can get him there. And like you just mentioned, Priyanka, I give him the 2 avenues, right? I tell him, and he can surrender and do it, or I let him work out his karma in the most spectacular manner. And obviously the Tiger Swami chose option number 2. But there's an interesting part in the Second Coming that describes this a little bit. Do you want to start reading that?
Sure. By the consciousness of God, which is within him, a great spiritual soul can transfer to others who are receptive an experience of some of his own God consciousness. The spiritual baptism is threefold. First, when the teacher bestows initiation, he sees the light himself as he baptizes the disciple.
Second, when the teacher sends that light into the initiate, which the devotee may or may not see himself, it remains a little while with its full vibratory power to effect a spiritual change in the devotee, but it is temporary. A master's blessings can for some time hold that light within the disciple, but the devotee must also make the effort to retain it.
Third, to keep the light permanently, the devotee has to make it his own through conscious endeavor in meditation and in following the spiritual guidance and practices, the sadhana given by the master. And I feel like we were in part 2 of this description, and now we are following to part 3. And part 3 is where the Tiger Swami realizes now this is all over. He actually went through the predicted 6 months of severe illness. He had blood poisoning, and that was, I don't really know. I've never had blood poisoning, but I imagine severe pain and struggling to stay alive for 6 months. And 6 months is a long time to suffer like that. And then he comes out of it, and he now very, very clearly sees that what this holy man said has come true. And he also feels a connection with him. He also longs for this man now. He longs for his spiritual guidance. And what he wants now is to stop tiger taming and become a disciple of this holy man. And I wonder, like we had a few things that we mentioned already, why this has happened. One theory is that he kind of burned the karma that he had to burn to get there, and or he basically, all the suffering kind of like was grinding down his ego until he kind of gave into that. Yes, Priyank?
Yeah, and during that 6 months, you must say that he would have had quite a lot of patience and to bear the quite horrific illness such as what he would have been at his deathbed, no doubt, for those 6 months. Heaven only knows how much the suffering is. So herein lies the way to find your guru is not just patience, it's also to use the moments of trials and tribulations in your life, and also when nothing specifically bad is happening in your life, just to increase your yearning for the guru and your yearning to find God through devotion and other means. So even if you haven't got a guru, but rather than just going out to all the caves in the Himalayas, if you develop this quality of devotion and just keep increasing that zest and that zeal, then the guru will come to the disciple, right? And this is what has happened with Soham Swami, because he didn't invite that saint to come and speak to his father. He was just going about his life, but then he kind of like the saint did like a bit of time travel, because he came in, disappeared, and then he knew that this devotee would go through this 6 months worth of heavy suffering, and they're going to essentially come back to him. So he allowed this Soham Swami to burn his karma and to really increase his zeal and devotion, and then he was ready to come, to accept the training of this Tibetan master that he found. And I'm reminded of the Rudyard Kipling poem "If" that we've discussed previously, and one specific line, which is to wait and not be tired by waiting.
Yeah, patience is really one of the virtues that you need on the spiritual path. that comes often, right? That you need the right attitude and infinite patience, basically, because God will come at his own time and not on your timing. And so, like you said, Priyank, it happened here as well. He said himself that his longing was sincere, and so one day the Swami turned up at his door and told him, "Let's we can start. Your training can start now. I accept you as my disciple." And it's funny that they talk about the wrong tendencies in the mind. They call them the beasts of ignorance roaming in the jungles of human mind. So it's kind of, he was taming beasts before, but now it's a different kind of beasts. And I think Mukunda used a similar language earlier when he said how to tame the tigers of the mind or something like that. Yes, Priyank?
Yeah, I just really, this paragraph, starting from enough of tiger taming and the bit you just read out, it's so moving, isn't it? It really captures the devotional side of me, especially when you reflect on when you've had enough of all the silly things that you were doing in your life before you entered the spiritual path. This paragraph just captures it, even though you didn't have Guruji saying it directly to you, but when you had his teachings, the teachings were the Guru, and hence he said it to you in his writing and in the lessons and in the initiation.
Yeah, and like you said, he then was initiated by the Guru into a spiritual path, and he said he opened the doors of his soul, and that's really what he wanted. And one interesting thing is he mentions the Himalayas, of course. He said, then we set out to the Himalayas and started my training, and it always goes back to that. Yes, Priyank?
Yeah, he opened my soul doors rusty and resistant with long disuse. There was resonate with that so well because it takes so much time, doesn't it, from when you start to when you get to a place where you're comfortable with the practices and you feel them they're working. And I mean, for some people it may be that their doors weren't rusty, that they're well lubricated and they're perfectly ready, but for me this line resonates very well. It took me the longest time just to even sit in the silence. I remember, like, when I first started, 10 minutes was torture. Like a Thursday service where there was that 25-minute section, I was like, oh my God, I can't, it's just too long. And a Tuesday service would have just been unimaginable because there's two 40-minute periods of meditation, and how far we have come on this path. But I really like on this, in the start of this paragraph, he says, I was initiated into the spiritual path by my saintly guru. And here he doesn't need to say kriya or yoga or pranayama or whatever the Tibetan practice was that they did. He just calls it the spiritual path, which rings true to the universality of approaching God. It is all the spiritual path. It doesn't matter which specific route that you take, and hence Guruji does not feel the need to even ask the Tiger Swami, oh, which type of meditation were you doing? What type of yoga were you doing? Were you doing your japa? Were you doing, was it chanting? That Buddhists do all sorts of different techniques. And he just called it the spiritual path. And I really love the universality, because it knows, that universality knows that doesn't have any spiritual, limitations on religious boundaries that we seem to be so stuck on these days.
That's a really good point. And I also feel I like the point you just made, because I think the technique is really important. And Baba, like Guruji, talks a lot about the lost science of Kriya Yoga and how it was brought back. But I also feel like that equally important, or even more important, is that you have a guru, right? And then if you have a saintly guru, like he describes him, like, I'm guessing whatever the guru says, what technique to do, that needs to be done, right? Because the guru knows best how to get you back. Yeah. And I found it interesting that they of course went to the Himalayas again. Do you think this kind of further motivated Mukunda to one day go to the Himalayas? There seems to be this really strong fascination, and a lot of the stories in his life, they kind of contain Himalaya stories or Himalaya sections. So very possible. But this is the end of the story that the Swami tells. And then Mukunda and his friend Chandi, they were very happy to hear that story, and they felt they were repaid for having to wait in the parlor for so long, which they say I think Guruji likened it to waiting in a doctor's office, just so to know how important the doctor is. And that's kind of how they did it. Yeah, and this concludes the chapter. So every time we finish a chapter, we kind of reflect on it a little bit. So this was chapter 6, the Tiger Swami. What did you guys think? What kind of impression did the chapter make on you, Priyank?
So a few things. So in the introduction to the Autobiography of Yogi, Taramata and Dayamata mentioned that this was one of the first chapters that Guruji wrote of the Autobiography of a Yogi, and so he must have had this. I wonder if he actually told anyone this story, like any of his disciples at the time, of this Tiger Swami story. Probably not. He was probably saving it for this book, and in that, the people were, even his own disciples that were in the ashram, would have been excited to read some of these stories, so they wouldn't have heard it themselves. So that was quite cool. But I really, this last part of the chapter that we've just been through today just really emphasized how powerful Guruji's writing is, in terms of not just spirituality and kriya, but interweaving action, Oscar-worthy action into his writing, and then weaving in like easily palatable philosophy. And I didn't realize that the things that we discussed today just came to me in terms of how this Soham Swami's guru must have intervened to potentially stop the tiger from completely mauling him, and also the setting all of this up, from the fight to all the suffering that he underwent and had the strength to overcome, and then turning to him through his own zeal and his own yearning for the guru. So really, really powerful messages for us in that, and the inspiring element of how profound, or how quick his life changed after that fight, is a really cool one about transforming ourselves as well.
It's interesting to hear you say that this may have been one of the first chapters that you wrote, because it's a very fun, lighthearted, very dramatic, I was going to say episode there, but chapter that we've just went through. So it's been really, really nice to go through it in more detail. But my feeling on it was that it was actually a really impactful time for Guruji in his, I suppose you call them formative years. He's meeting so many saints, and this was somebody who, for me, my intuition or my feeling is just that he had a big impact on him. I could be wrong there, but yeah, the key takeaway for me, the volition and the power over the mind, from the mind over the body, and there's so many great lessons in here, and it was just delivered in a exquisite way that we're really enjoying digesting everything bit by bit. So yeah, really, really fun, lighthearted chapter, and we've got another one coming up that's just even potentially more mind-blowing, right, in its own way. So it's been a lovely chapter to go through.
Yeah, I can only I just want to add to that I love the story, and I was this was one of the chapters where I was very, very absorbed. I couldn't stop reading. I don't think this is the chapter where you read it halfway and then you put the book away, right? you need to know what happens, and I feel like because a lot is happening, and he's right. The writing style is very, very. I wouldn't say it's verbose. It's very to the point, but it's also very much expressing all kinds of emotion and all kinds of feelings, and yeah, the ton of lessons in there. How he kind of draws the connection between using your mind to fight tigers to using your mind to fight the inner bad tendencies, right? And I find that fascinating. All right, Priyank, do you want to give us a quick glimpse of what's to come?
Yeah, sure. So chapter 7 we are now doing, and that is entitled The Levitating Saint. Nagendranath Baduri. So this chapter is a chapter, again, that goes in line with very mystical and supernatural titles of the chapters. And this is one of the more out there ones, and one which resonates with a lot of us for some reason or the other. This came as I was reading this chapter, rereading it for this preparation. It kind of came in and out of my dreams. This elements of this, which we'll talk about in the next episode. But it's one where we're going to look at how Guruji's zeal for finding these little gems of mystical masters amidst everyday life, which is a skill that he picked up. And we're going to discuss the need for, or the importance of pilgrimage, or the value of being around masters such as this, as well as the the science defying art of levitation that he overcomes. So it's going to be a cool one.
Yes, looking forward to that one. But that said, we concluded chapter 6. I want to thank all the listeners. Thank you, Chris and Priyank. And yeah, stay tuned for chapter 7. Jai Guru, everybody.
Jai Guru.